"We don't serve beggars here." My sister's voice rang out, cold as steel, cutting through the polished air of a bank that smelled like perfume and power. I stood there, holding a withdrawal slip for $100, as dozens of eyes pierced through me like needles. 10 years ago, I had walked out of this very building in the rain, head down, humiliated and fired by my own sister. Today, I wasn't here to prove anything. I was just helping an elderly neighbor who needed her air conditioner repaired. But only minutes after those words left her mouth, the entire banking system where Charlotte worked as a branch manager would freeze. Regional directors would rush in, and my sister would fall to her knees, begging for forgiveness. This story isn't about money. It's about dignity, the kind you only recognize after it's been crushed completely. Have you ever been looked down on by your own family, just because you had nothing to your name? I really want to know, where are you watching this from? My name is Victoria Bennett. I was born and raised in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, a place where the summer sun could melt even the smallest of dreams. My family lived in a white 2-story house with a wooden fence and a sign that read, "Bennett Financial Consulting," hanging by the front gate. My father, Thomas Bennett, was a respected financial advisor in the area. He held one unshakable belief: money defines a person's worth. I heard that phrase before I even knew how to spell the word value. To him, success was measured by the number in your account, the car you drove, and the hands you shook at Dallas business parties. To me, it was a curse disguised as a philosophy. Charlotte, my older sister, was 4 years ahead of me. From the very beginning, she was the shining star in our father's eyes. She went to an expensive private school, had her own tutor, and for her 16th birthday, our father hosted a grand party at the Hilton Hotel where he handed her the keys to a brand new silver BMW with the words, "This is a reward for my deserving daughter." I stood in the corner of the room, holding a cheap camera, snapping pictures of them smiling brightly together. That moment marked the end of my childhood at 12, the moment I realized I was merely an audience member in my own family. A month later, my birthday came. My mother bought me a small cake, and my father placed a silver-wrapped gift on the table. Inside was his old laptop, the paint chipped along the edges. He said, "Here, use this to practice typing. Maybe one day you'll get an office job." I smiled and pretended to be grateful, though deep inside, there was only an empty, frozen space. My mother, Margaret, was the only one who ever tried to balance things between us. Whenever she pointed out how obvious his favoritism had become, my father would respond in his steady, dismissive tone. "Charlotte has potential. Victoria just needs enough education to hold a stable job, and that's fine." Those words, repeated over and over through the years, eventually built an invisible wall separating me from the rest of my family. Charlotte heard them and believed them. She began calling me Mom's Charity Project. She joked with her friends that I was only born so our parents could look more compassionate. Each time, my mother tried to change the subject, while I stayed silent, focused on the small notebook where I wrote down everything I wanted to learn. I didn't know why I was so patient, only that something inside me refused to accept that my father was right. Evenings in the Bennett household were always filled with the sound of keyboards and the smell of coffee. My father worked late in his study, the light from his desk spilling through the crack in the door. One night, I stood quietly outside and saw him typing halfway through a financial report for one of his clients. He rubbed his temples, sighed, then walked away from the desk. When he went to bed, I slipped into his chair, opened my old laptop, and tried to copy the formulas he had left on the screen. I didn't understand much, but curiosity kept me awake night after night. I taught myself Excel through free online videos, learned how to write macros, and later, how to code. No one knew that while the rest of the house slept, I sat under the dim light of my desk lamp, typing clumsy lines of code with burning eyes. I didn't do it for praise. I did it to know what it felt like to understand something on my own, a feeling no one had ever given me. By then, Charlotte was already in college, often coming home bragging about her grades, her trips to Europe, and the parties she attended with her finance club friends. My father looked at her with pride. Meanwhile, I was still in public school, where the computer lab machines were old and the mice clicked loudly with every drag. But that didn't stop me. I joined the technology club, fixed the school's broken software, and was praised by my teacher in front of the class. When I told my father about it, he only nodded absently and said, "That's fine. But don't waste too much time on programming. Focus on your real studies." I smiled and didn't argue, because I knew in his world, daughters weren't meant to code. They were meant to be reliable secretaries. End of chapter. Every time Charlotte came home to visit, she never forgot to remind me of my place with that same mocking tone. "Victoria, are you still playing around with your little coding hobby? How adorable." You know, out there in the real world, nobody pays people just to sit and type. I didn't respond. I had learned to use silence as my shield. Behind her back, I opened my laptop and kept typing. In that moment, I felt freer than I ever had before. There were nights in Dallas so cold that the wind howled through the window like a warning. I would still be there, in my small room, holding a mug of cold cocoa, my eyes glued to the computer screen. I didn't have a car, or glamorous parties, or my father's praise. But I had something they never did: patience, and a quiet fire burning inside me. I never realized how important those lonely nights were. All I knew was that each time the screen lit up, I felt like I was moving closer to something bigger than myself. When my mother quietly brought me a cookie and whispered, "Don't let them make you doubt who you are," I only nodded. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but the look in her eyes made me feel like someone was still on my side. And it was because of those simple words that I kept learning, kept trying, kept believing. I didn't know then that in those nights, beneath the sound of the wind, the soft glow of the lamp, and the flickering lines of code on that old screen, I was already rewriting my destiny. After graduating from a public university in Austin, I returned to Dallas with an ordinary degree in information technology and a small hope that my father might finally see me differently. But the first thing he asked when I walked through the door wasn't, "What did you learn?" It was, "Have you found a job yet?" I tried to keep my tone calm as I told him I had applied for a position at Central Union Bank, the same bank where my sister Charlotte worked as a mid-level manager. For the first time in years, he smiled, and a faint glimmer of pride appeared in his eyes. "Working at your sister's bank is a great opportunity," he said. "Learn to behave like someone with status." His words stung. In his eyes, my worth still had to be borrowed from my sister's reputation just to be seen. A few weeks later, I was officially hired in the customer data department. My job was to review, clean, and store transaction data, a mid-level technical position, unglamorous but requiring precision. Charlotte's office was on the third floor, while I worked on the ground floor, where employees moved constantly in and out, the smell of coffee blending with the sound of keyboards and printers. During those first weeks, I worked hard, determined not to let anyone think I was there because of her. Occasionally, I saw Charlotte pass through the workspace, her carefully curled blonde hair, beige blazer, and sharp heels echoing against the marble floor. Each time our eyes met, she only gave me a slight nod, as if I were just another employee she barely knew. 3 months later, on a late evening while I was reviewing transaction data for corporate clients, I noticed something strange in the system. A small stream of data was being automatically copied out every few hours. At first, I thought it was a software glitch, but when I dug deeper, I realized someone was exploiting a vulnerability in the API to gain unauthorized access. If that information leaked, the bank could lose millions of dollars, not to mention its reputation. I stayed the entire night, sitting in front of the dimly lit screen, writing a temporary code patch to block the data flow and submitting an internal security report. No one had asked me to do it, and no one knew I stayed until 2 in the morning, except for the rain tapping against the window and the streetlight flickering on the glass. When the message "Security breach blocked successfully" appeared, I finally exhaled. A quiet wave of pride washed over me. The next morning, when I arrived at the office, the whole floor was buzzing. The branch director and the IT team were running around, talking about a data breach stopped just in time. I stayed silent, just listening. Then I heard the sharp sound of heels from the doorway. Charlotte walked in with the director, confidence radiating from her face. He said loudly, "Charlotte, outstanding work. You handled the crisis so quickly. The system was stabilized in less than 24 hours." I froze. Charlotte smiled modestly and replied, "We caught it early. I instructed the technical team to fix it overnight." He patted her on the shoulder, full of admiration, while I stood in the corner, my hand trembling around my coffee cup. Her "we" only meant one person, me. That afternoon, I was called to my sister's office. The room was cold and spotless, almost sterile. Charlotte sat behind her desk, her eyes fixed on the computer screen. "I heard you've been doing quite well," she began in a flat tone. I stayed silent. "But Victoria, there's something you need to understand. In this place, success is about image, not just ability. If everyone demanded credit for a few lines of code, this bank would fall apart." I tried to stay calm and replied softly, "I don't need recognition, just fairness. I just thought, at least my name should be mentioned in the technical report." Charlotte finally looked up, her eyes sharp as glass. "Who do you think you are? Don't ever dream of rising to this level. You're just a lower-level employee. Remember that." Her words cut through me like a blade. I left the office without another word, my throat tight with bitterness and humiliation. A few days later, I received an email from HR. "Due to restructuring, your position will be terminated by the end of the week." I didn't need anyone to tell me who was behind it. When I asked directly, the department head only sighed. "I'm sorry, Victoria, there's nothing we can do." That day, I packed my things into a small box, a pen, a few sticky notes, and my old laptop. Everyone in the office watched me with pity. One coworker quietly whispered, "It's not fair. Everyone knows who stopped that data breach." I just smiled faintly and said, "It's okay. Eventually, the truth always comes out." That afternoon, the rain poured down. I stood under the bank's awning, holding my box of belongings, watching the cars pass by. Charlotte walked out through the main doors, sharing an umbrella with the branch director, her smile bright and effortless. I caught fragments of his words. "Charlotte, you deserve that promotion. The bank needs people like you." And there I was, the one who had saved the entire system soaked to the bone, my cheap shoes filling with rainwater. As they stepped into their car, I saw my reflection in the glass door, small, lost, but no longer afraid. There was a faint flicker of light inside me, like an ember refusing to die in the storm. I wandered home through the rain, the steady rhythm drumming on the tin roof above me. My mother asked, "Are you all right, Victoria?" I hesitated, then lied. "Yes, just a little tired." She stayed quiet for a moment, as if she understood more than I could say. Then she whispered, "Sometimes losing a place isn't the end, it's how you find your freedom." I didn't answer. I went back to my room and stared at the computer screen, the same old laptop that had once been called a pity gift. I turned it on and reopened the code I had written that night. Those simple lines had saved a bank, but they couldn't save my dignity. As the rain began to ease, I sat alone under the warm glow of the desk lamp, my heart heavy with emptiness and anger. I knew I couldn't keep living in Charlotte's shadow any longer. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but I was sure of one thing: I would never let anyone steal my work again. That night, I opened a new document and typed a title: Project Green Fund, an idea for a fair credit system. I began writing the first lines, not realizing that in that moment, surrounded by rain, humiliation, and an old laptop, I was stepping out of their shadow to begin writing a story that was finally mine. I left Dallas on an early June morning, just as the sun was rising and the trees along the highway were still wrapped in mist. In the trunk of my car were my old laptop, a suitcase of clothes, and the last few $100s I had saved. I didn't look back. That city, with its glowing houses and dinner tables filled with empty boasting, was no longer my home. I drove for 4 hours to Austin, a city of dreamers, where startups and failures shared the same coffee shops. I rented a small room in South Lamar, on the second floor of an old brick house, its walls stained with moisture and the air conditioner rattling every time it started. The rent was $400 a month, which also included the sound of a guitar playing from the apartment next door. That first night, I lay on the creaky metal bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, whispering to myself, "This is where I start over." By day, I worked as a data entry clerk for a small accounting firm. By night, I sat at the corner desk, writing down ideas for a fair credit system. I remembered the struggling customers who had been denied loans simply because their risk profile was too high, even though the scoring system itself was outdated. I wanted to change that. I began building formulas to model creditworthiness based on real spending behavior, not just numbers on a report. Each night, my room stayed lit until long past midnight. Mrs. Gable, my downstairs neighbor, a widow in her 60s, often knocked on my door, bringing a cup of tea and saying, "Sweetheart, get some sleep. That computer's not going anywhere." I would just smile. She was the first person in years who treated me with warmth that didn't have conditions attached. One autumn afternoon, while I was sitting in a small cafe on Barton Springs Road, surrounded by stacks of papers covered in financial formulas and hand-drawn charts, a man walked up to me. He wore a rolled-up white shirt, his hair slightly messy, his eyes sharp yet kind. "Mind if I sit here?" "Looks like this place is full," he said softly. I nodded. A few moments later, he leaned over, glanced at my papers, and chuckled. "Looks like a treasure map." I smiled faintly. "Not really, more like the survival map of someone trying to make it." He tilted his head. "What are you working on?" I looked up, meeting his gaze. "Trying to prove that you don't have to be born rich to build a fair credit system." He paused, studying me for a moment, then asked for my name. When I said, "Victoria Bennett," he raised an eyebrow. "Bennett, that sounds familiar." "I'm Miles Cohen, CEO of Atlas Ventures." I froze for a moment. The name was well known in the investment world, the man who had turned countless startups from nothing into icons. Miles looked at me thoughtfully before saying, "Do you have something I can look at?" I opened my laptop and showed him the simulation I had built in Python. He watched intently, asking detailed questions about every element. After 2 hours, he leaned back in his chair, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "I'll invest in you. $50,000, no strings attached, no conditions. I just want to see how far you can go." I thought I misheard him. "You trust me?" He smiled and said, "I don't invest in resumes. I invest in eyes, and yours look like someone who's been knocked down but refuses to stay there." I used that money to rent a small workspace in the warehouse district. I repainted the walls, bought a few old desks, and set up a mini server. I named the project Green Fund, with a logo of a silver coin sprouting a green leaf. My goal was to build an AI-driven platform that allowed small and mid-sized businesses to be evaluated fairly for credit based on real data and operational performance, not connections or inherited wealth. During that time, I worked nearly 20 hours a day. Some nights, I fell asleep on the keyboard and woke up with key marks on my cheek. Mrs. Gable still brought me cookies every evening, saying, "When you get rich, don't forget to pay your rent on time to this old landlady." I laughed and promised, "If I make it, I'll replace that leaky roof downstairs for you." A year later, Green Fund started gaining attention. Many small businesses in Austin tested the beta version and found it easier to access credit than ever before. I learned how to talk to investors, though my palms still trembled every time I presented. Miles often stopped by the office, bringing coffee and saying only one thing: "Keep going. Don't let anyone make you forget why you started." Those words stayed with me. By the third year, Green Fund officially received a $2 billion investment from Atlas Ventures, making it one of the fastest-growing fintech companies in the region. When the press asked for comments, I simply said, "I'm just trying to fix what I once saw was broken." Money came in, fame followed, but my life stayed simple. I kept living in the same old apartment for another year, still bought my coffee from the small shop down the street, and walked through Zilker Park every morning. I didn't buy luxury cars, designer clothes, or throw celebration parties. Instead, I used part of my profits to create a scholarship fund for finance and tech students from low-income families. Every time I handed out a scholarship, I remembered those cold nights years ago, sitting beside that chipped old laptop. In every speech, I always said, I wasn't born rich, but I'm rich because I understand the value of effort. Mrs. Gable had become the closest thing to family I had in Austin. We often had dinner together, sharing small stories about the neighbors or the little birds that perched on the balcony. One evening, she asked, "Why haven't you ever told me about your family?" I hesitated, then replied quietly, "They're too busy for small things like me." She didn't press further, only squeezed my hand gently. "You know," she said, "sometimes it takes a lifetime to realize who truly sees you as family." During those years, I didn't call home. I didn't send messages or birthday wishes. I wasn't angry anymore, nor did I hate them. I just felt nothing. I knew Charlotte was still working at Central Union Bank, rising fast, appearing in business magazines under titles like Outstanding Female Executive. My parents were still proud, still talking about their successful eldest daughter. And me, the second child, the one once called Mom's Project of Pity, was still the name left unspoken at every dinner table. Once, I came across their family photo in a local magazine. My father wore a suit, Charlotte stood in the middle holding an award, and my mother smiled faintly behind them. I stared at it for a long time before folding the page and tucking it into a drawer. Not because it hurt, but because I realized I no longer belonged in that picture. I had my own life now, small, perhaps, but mine, a life no one could take away. That night, I sat on the balcony, watching the Austin lights shimmer on the surface of the Colorado River, the wind carrying the scent of fresh grass. I thought about what Miles had said the first day we met. I invest in eyes. Maybe, for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be seen not by my father, not by my sister, but by myself. I took a sip of tea and smiled faintly. I didn't know how far Green Fund would go, but I knew one thing for certain. If I ever returned to Dallas, it wouldn't be to seek validation. It would be to see if they still dared to look down on someone like me. And I had no idea that day would come, just not in a way anyone could have predicted. It was a Monday morning in May, and the Austin heat clung to the skin like glue. I was about to pour myself a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Gable, her voice trembling, as if the heat had found its way into her lungs. "Victoria, my air conditioner just died. The repair guy says he needs to order a part, but they only take cash about $100. I don't have it on hand, and it's so hot today. I'm worried my dog won't make it." I gripped the phone, glancing toward the window where sunlight carved a harsh white streak across the floor. "Don't worry, I'll withdraw the cash and bring it right over." I didn't ask questions or suggest a transfer. I knew how small repair crews in Texas often preferred dealing in cash, especially for deposit checks. Sometimes, all the convenience we build entire tech platforms to solve still stops short at human habit. And I wasn't about to argue or explain while the apartment downstairs felt like an oven. I put on a white shirt that had grown soft from too many washes, a pair of old jeans, tied my hair back, and slipped into my worn canvas shoes. I pulled my baseball cap low to shield my eyes from the harsh Sunday. Locking the door behind me, I hurried down the chalk-dusted stairs and called out to Mrs. Gable, who stood at her doorway, her face flushed from the heat. "Close your door, turn on the fan, and place a bowl of water in front of your dog to keep him cool. I'll be right back." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the doorframe for support. The Central Union Bank branch in Austin was only a 12-minute drive away. I started the car, feeling the blast of cold air from the divided by sea on my face, yet still hearing the sun hiss against the windshield outside. At the South Lamar intersection, the light turned red for what felt like forever. My mind flicked briefly through morning meetings, weekly schedules, unanswered emails, but none of those things mattered more than an elderly widow living alone in a sweltering apartment, struggling to breathe through thick, suffocating air. Central Union Bank appeared behind a line of oak trees, a gleaming glass building with spotless granite steps and posters inside boasting about trust, security, and customer respect. I parked, walked briskly toward the entrance, and felt the blast of cold air hit me, turning the sweat on my skin into tiny beads of relief. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with new carpet and freshly printed paper. Screens lined the walls, displaying smooth, polished slogans about integrity and reliability. I watched the words scroll past clean, sleek, harmless. The line at the teller counter wasn't long. A security guard stood by the door, one hand resting on his radio, his gaze wandering lazily. I adjusted my cap, kept my posture small, and pulled my bank card from my wallet. I had been to countless banks before, withdrawing cash for work or errands, but today, standing under that deep blue Central Union sign, something unspoken hung in the air as if an invisible circle was about to close, and I didn't yet know it. My turn came. The young teller, with brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck and a practiced smile, looked up. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I placed my card on the counter and said simply, "I'd like to withdraw $100 in cash." She typed a few keys, opened the drawer, then suddenly froze as if someone had tapped her on the shoulder. At that exact moment, the sharp sound of heels struck the floor behind her, precise, deliberate, and cold, like glass meeting steel. I didn't look up right away. Some sounds peel back the years in an instant: the rain that once fell on the Dallas Bank steps, the applause for a successful system recovery, the click of an office door closing in my face. The footsteps drew closer. A shadow fell across the counter. The teller straightened up quickly and swallowed hard. "Gee, good morning, Miss Charlotte." I lifted my gaze. Charlotte stood there, her blonde hair curled neatly, her navy blazer perfectly fitted, a small Central Union pin gleaming on her lapel. There wasn't a single crease of memory on her face, only the polished stillness of a woman used to press conferences and control. I looked into her eyes and saw my reflection. An old white shirt, a faded baseball cap, hair tied back, ink stains on my fingers from signing too many documents the night before. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her thin smile slicing through the air like a blade through butter. "I thought I was seeing things," she said, her tone calm and detached, as if adjusting a display item on a shelf. "It's been a long time, Victoria." I nodded slightly, keeping my voice steady, so steady it almost sounded emotionless. "I just want to withdraw $100. My neighbor needs a deposit for an air conditioning repair." I said it plainly, honestly, just as it was. Charlotte didn't look at me, she looked through me, the way someone looks through the faint scent of old paper. Then she laughed. A short, crisp laugh, clear, controlled, and cold. "We don't serve beggars here," she said. "This is a bank, not a donation center." Her words hit the floor like a glass of ice shattering against marble. The people in line turned. A woman in her 60s clutched her purse tighter. A young man in a checkered shirt snickered quietly. The security guard cleared his throat and rested his hand on his belt, ready to handle a difficult customer if needed. The teller glanced at me with visible discomfort, then looked back at Charlotte, waiting for a signal. I didn't move. I was no longer 12, awed by a BMW, nor 22, trembling outside a manager's door. I stood calm, the same calm I had learned in front of a screen when a logic error flashed at the perfect wrong time. Between the polite noise of the bank and the cutting silence of her insult, I heard my own voice rise from somewhere deep inside, a voice that had been pressed down for decades. "I just want to withdraw $100, I said again, evenly, smoothly, my tone like a blade sharpened to precision. Charlotte leaned on the counter, tilting slightly closer, enough for the faint trace of her perfume to fill the air between us. "Let me make this clear for you, Victoria," she said, her tone smooth, almost rehearsed. "This is a bank. We don't hand out charity money. If you're short $100, maybe you should consider going somewhere more appropriate." The man standing behind me laughed out loud. Someone else let out a low whistle, the kind people make when watching a perfectly executed hit. I noticed the teller's hands trembling slightly. She didn't dare press another key. The air in the lobby tightened as eyes began to gather, drawn like metal shavings to an invisible magnet because public humiliation, after all, always draws a crowd. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air slide through my nose, calming the pulse inside me until my heart felt like a still lake after a thrown pebble. In my mind, I saw Mrs. Gable at home, her fan wobbling as it pushed weak circles of air around her old panting dog. I saw the nights I fell asleep on my keyboard. I heard Miles' voice. I invest in eyes. I looked straight at Charlotte, and for the first time, I didn't see her as the mountain blocking my sunlight. I saw her as what she was, a bank employee who had forgotten what the word service meant. I understand, I said softly, my voice so calm it bordered on polite. You don't serve beggars. I tilted my head slightly, as if making room for someone rushing past. Then perhaps we should follow the proper procedure. I'd like to withdraw $100 from my own account, in cash. I emphasized the words my own gently, like a whisper. The teller swallowed hard and reached for the keyboard. Charlotte raised her hand slightly, a conductor stopping the orchestra before its final note. Wait, she said, then turned to the security guard. Maintain order. Folding her arms, she fixed her gaze on me, the same gaze I had known since childhood. The gaze of someone who believed power was the only key that ever fit. In the lobby, whispers began to rise like a drizzle. Someone muttered, "She's probably over her limit," and another voice replied, "Just look at the way she's dressed." I heard every word and, oddly enough, it made me want to laugh. My mind drifted to the glass office in the warehouse district, the engineering team huddled around clusters of servers, and the stream of small business owners who submitted their applications to Green Fund each day, hoping for a fair chance. I thought about all of that, then looked down at the worn white shirt I was wearing. Maybe today, I had chosen the perfect outfit, one that mirrored exactly how people misjudge worth. "Charlotte," I said softly, neither smiling nor frowning. "That $100 is to help a neighbor, so her air conditioner can work again on the hottest day of May. I didn't come here to beg. I came to withdraw what's mine." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, that same cold smile curving back into place like an old habit. "Then prove you deserve to be served." Her voice was sharp, precise, and loud enough to reach every ear eager for a spectacle. And in that instant, I knew just one more beat, and the entire rhythm of this building was about to change. The air inside the bank seemed to solidify after Charlotte's cold command. I didn't respond. I simply kept my gaze fixed on the monitor behind the teller's desk where numbers danced, where thousands of accounts rose and fell each second, where I knew the system better than anyone else in this room ever could. My silence began to make people restless. A man in line exhaled sharply. "Either take your money or move. You're holding everyone up." Charlotte smiled, pleased with the unintentional support, and turned to the teller. "Cancel the transaction. Have her escorted out." Her voice was sharp as a blade, stripped of even the smallest trace of pity. I inhaled slowly. A part of me wanted to leave to protect the peace I had spent years building. But another part, the one that had once been crushed under the heel of someone who thought they had the right to define my worth, refused to stay silent. I opened my bag and took out my phone. The screen lit up, reflecting my calm face in the glass. At first, no one paid attention until they noticed my fingers tapping across the screen, connecting to the National Banking Security Network, the same one linked to Green Fund's liquidity monitoring system. A soft ping echoed. The teller's monitor in front of me flickered. She gasped quietly, glancing around, thinking it was a glitch. Charlotte frowned. "What's happening?" The teller stammered. "The system, it's requesting dual authentication, I don't know why." Before she could finish, every screen behind the counter lit up at once, switching from the standard blue interface to a muted gray. A new line appeared across each display, bold and unmistakable. "Request, withdraw $5.5 billion. Account holder, Green Fund Holdings Incorporated." The sound of keyboards stopped. The air in the lobby thickened until the low hum of the air conditioner was the only thing left. Charlotte froze. She turned to me, her voice dry and uneven. What kind of joke is this? I smiled softly, my tone light, almost conversational. No joke. In that case, I'd like to withdraw $5.5 billion from your reserves. A long, piercing beep came from the central server. Immediately, every teller looked up at their monitors. Red warning banners flashed across the screens. Owner account, Green Fund Holdings. Transaction requires CEO authentication. Junior staff members stood up, their chairs scraping the floor. The security guard, who had been leaning lazily against the wall moments earlier, now scanned the room, unsure of what to do. A branch manager hurried over, his face pale as chalk. Charlotte tried to steady herself. "This must be some mistake," she said, her voice tight but still grasping for control. "There's no way the system could be linked to—" Her sentence was cut short by the shrill ring of her desk phone. I didn't have to guess who it was. The Central Union Risk Control Department. Charlotte picked up the receiver, listened for only a few seconds, and I watched the color drain from her face. From where I stood, I could hear the voice on the other end, crisp and urgent through the speaker. "Confirm immediately. The account belonging to Green Fund Holdings is initiating a withdrawal request from Central Union Bank. Amount: $5.5 billion. This is the primary owner account, CEO biometric authentication verified." I stood still, the same faint smile resting on my lips. Charlotte set the phone down, her hands trembling. In her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of the truth. Fear that the little sister she once called a project of pity now held the power to bring her entire bank to its knees with just a few taps on a screen. At that moment, the glass doors behind me opened. A middle-aged man in a gray suit hurried inside, followed by two assistants. I recognized him instantly from the badge on his lapel. Grant Fuller, Regional Director of Central Union Bank. He walked straight toward me, his steps brisk but measured, his tone respectful. "Miss Bennett," he said, inclining his head slightly, his voice low but firm enough for everyone to hear. "On behalf of Central Union, we are honored by your visit." The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Charlotte looked from him to me, her lips parting soundlessly. "Ms. Bennett?" she repeated, as if trying to convince herself that what she'd just heard couldn't possibly be true. Grant Fuller turned to her, his expression tightening. "Mrs. Bennett is the CEO and primary owner of Green Fund Holdings, our largest strategic liquidity partner. It seems you weren't informed that she's here to review your internal operations?" His tone sharpened on the last sentence, the words landing like a slap made entirely of language. The lobby erupted into a wave of whispers. Faces turned toward me, shocked, curious, stunned. I tilted my head slightly, my voice calm, low, and steady, carrying just enough for all to hear. "I didn't come here to withdraw money," I said. "I came to withdraw the respect that you've owed me for far too long." Grant Fuller immediately nodded and gestured for all the employees to step back. Charlotte, perfect in her immaculate suit, was visibly shaking. Her eyes reddened, and her hands clenched together so tightly that her nude-colored nails left marks on her skin. "Victoria, please don't do this," she stammered, her voice trembling between panic and desperation. I didn't know." I looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't know who I was," I said quietly, "or you didn't know that I had worth." Then I unlocked my phone and entered the final command. Across every server screen, a line appeared: transaction completed. Green Fund Holdings, funds relocated to Empire Financial Bank. Lawman. A chime echoed through the bank's network, the kind of sound that marks the end of an auction. I hadn't withdrawn a single dollar in cash. I had simply transferred Green Fund's entire liquidity reserve to a competing institution, a single decision that would cost Central Union billions in deposit value before noon. No one spoke. The silence felt almost reverent. Grant Fuller bowed deeply, his voice solemn. "We sincerely apologize for our failure, Miss Bennett. Certain personnel will face immediate internal investigation. Please allow us a chance to make this right." I shook my head slowly, my gaze calm steady as the sky after a storm. That won't be necessary, I said. I'm not here for reparations. I just want everyone here to remember respect cannot be granted by a title. Charlotte took one unsteady step toward me, then collapsed. The sharp sound of her heels striking the marble floor echoed through the room. She grabbed my hand, her voice breaking. Victoria, please don't do this. You'll destroy my career. Take everything if you want, but, please, don't take everything from me. Her tears hit the cold stone floor, each drop shattering like glass. I looked down at the woman who had once sent me away in the rain. The scene was identical to the memory I'd carried for years, only now our places had reversed. Do you remember that feeling? I asked quietly. The feeling of standing in front of someone, knowing they see you as nothing and being powerless to defend yourself? Charlotte didn't answer. She only wept, her fingers still clutching mine. I gently pulled my hand free and looked straight into her eyes. Welcome, I said softly, to how it feels to be invisible. Then I turned and walked away. The sound of my footsteps echoed evenly across the silent lobby. No one dared speak, no one dared even breathe too loudly. The glass doors slid open, and the hot Austin air swept in, carrying the honk of distant traffic and the faint smell of asphalt, and Sunday I stepped outside. The sunlight hit my shoulders, searing, blinding, but inside, I felt weightless. Behind me, I heard someone call my name, faint and broken, lost between the hum of the air conditioner and the gasping breaths of the room. But I didn't look back. I walked straight to my car, opened the door, and set my phone on the passenger seat. A notification flashed across the screen. Transaction completed successfully. I stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. Not because of the money, but because, for the first time in years, I no longer owed anyone an explanation. I started the engine and merged into the stream of traffic. On the radio, Tracy Chapman's "Give Me One Reason" played softly. I couldn't help but laugh. I had just left the same place that, 10 years ago, had cast me out into the rain. This time, I wasn't carrying a cardboard box or an old laptop. I carried peace and the one thing they had lost forever: respect. The news spread faster than any transaction I'd ever processed. Within hours of my leaving the bank, headlines covered every financial outlet. Green Fund CEO withdraws $5.5 billion from Central Union Bank system in turmoil. Major networks, from Bloomberg to Business Insider, all used the same photo. Me stepping out through the glass doors, sunlight glinting off my simple white shirt, my face caught in a faint smile. They speculated endlessly that it was a strategic fintech power move, that Green Fund was restructuring its banking partnerships, that this decision could shake the entire liquidity market. But none of them knew the 70s IXV's truth. Behind that multi-billion-dollar transfer was simply a woman who had once been called a beggar by her own sister. That evening, my phone didn't stop ringing. Miles Cohen was the first to call. His voice was calm, but beneath it, I could hear genuine astonishment. Victoria, do you realize how big of a storm this is going to cause? I looked out the window, where the sunset painted Austin's skyline in shades of red and gold. I do, I said slowly. But sometimes, a storm is the only way for the lake to reflect the sky truthfully again. Miles was quiet for a long moment before he spoke softly. I'm not calling to question your decision. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. Those words were simple, but they pierced deeper than anything I'd heard before, because it was the first time in my life someone said they were proud of me without needing me to prove my worth. When I turned on the TV, the news was already broadcasting live from outside Central Union Bank's headquarters. Reporters crowded together, microphones raised high, camera flashes exploding nonstop. A red ticker scrolled across the screen. Branch manager suspended for discriminatory behavior toward VIP client. I didn't need to see to know who they were talking about, but when Charlotte's image appeared on the screen, my heart still tightened. She wore a gray suit, her face pale, though she tried to hold on to composure. Beside her stood the bank's spokesperson, reading from a prepared statement. Charlotte remained still, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes hollow. When a reporter called out, "Do you have anything you'd like to say to the CEO of Green Fund?" she pressed her lips together before answering in a flat, mechanical tone. "I only wanted to protect the bank's image. Any misunderstanding will be clarified." Aita. I sat still, my eyes fixed on the screen, feeling as if I were watching a stranger. "Protect the bank's image," I whispered, repeating her words, then let out a quiet sigh. "You still don't understand." It wasn't an accusation, just the truth. In her world, image mattered more than integrity, reputation outweighed honesty, and power was the only measure of worth. She never realized that her own disdain was what brought the entire system crashing down. The next day, the media went deeper. Articles began exposing internal favoritism, a toxic work culture, and the classist attitude among several Central Union managers. Charlotte was officially suspended, pending disciplinary review. One headline read, "The woman who said we don't serve beggars here just cost her bank $5.5 billion." Beneath it were thousands of comments, most angry, some pitying. I didn't read them all, I only skimmed a few lines. Karma hits fast. Justice doesn't wait for the next life. Respect should be standard, not a privilege. Those words didn't make me happy, nor did they make me sad. I just felt, for the first time, that justice had arrived without me having to scream for it. By afternoon, my phone rang again. My father's name appeared on the screen, and my hand trembled slightly. It had been 3 years since he last called, and that time, it was only to ask for a small investment. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. On the other end, his voice was strained, stripped of the arrogance I'd known all my life. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I never thought." His voice cracked, breaking into a rough, shaky sob, tangled with the labored breathing of an aging man. "Please help your sister. She can't handle the shame. The media's tearing her apart." I listened without saying a word. Part of me wanted to hang up. But another part held the phone close, because in his tears, I could hear the echo of the man who once taught me that money defines worth. Now, he wasn't crying over lost money, he was crying over the realization that money could never buy back dignity. I didn't respond. I just let him speak until the silence on the other end grew heavy. Then, I said quietly, "You once told me that no one respects a person without money. Do you see it now? Even money can't buy respect." And with that, I ended the call. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only the quiet sense of a door closing behind a long sigh. That evening, I opened my laptop. Dozens of emails from reporters flooded my inbox. Everyone wanted an interview, wanted me to tell the real version of the story. I typed one single line and sent it to them all. No story is worth telling unless it teaches people how to treat others better. Then I hit send and closed the laptop. Outside, Austin pulsed with life. The riverside bars glowed with lights, music floated through the air, blending with the soft sound of water brushing the shore. I poured myself a glass of white wine and stood by the window. From here, I could see the Green Fund office tower, the symbol of everything I had built with my own hands. Yet, strangely, in what should have been my moment of triumph, I didn't feel joy. There was only a quiet emptiness spreading gently through my chest. I thought about Charlotte's eyes as she knelt on the cold marble floor, stripped of arrogance, filled only with fear. Whatever she had done, in the end, we were still two daughters raised under the same roof, taught the same unyielding lesson. Money defines worth. Maybe that's why she never learned to see the person behind the numbers. When the final news broadcast of the day ended, the anchor said, "Central Union Bank has announced plans for a full restructuring and internal investigation. Sources confirm that the branch director of the Dallas office has submitted her resignation." I turned off the TV. The room fell into silence. I sat back in my chair, still holding my wine glass. The city lights reflected off the window, blending my image into the skyline, a woman once dismissed as insignificant, now sitting in a world she no longer needed to prove herself to. I set the glass down and whispered softly, almost like an exhale. You still don't understand. It wasn't sarcasm. It was a quiet prayer that one day, Charlotte would realize respect isn't something others give you, it's something you must learn to give. Then I stood up, turned off the light, leaving the only glow in the room the faint shimmer of the city outside, radiant, distant, and fair in its own indifferent way. The next morning, Austin was bathed in soft golden light, reflecting off the glass facade of the Green Fund building. Outside, self-driving cars moved silently along the boulevard, while inside, the 32nd floor corridor gleamed in minimalist white. I had just finished a virtual meeting with investors in New York when my assistant entered, her tone hesitant. "There's a woman here to see you, ma'am, no appointment. She says she's your sister." I looked up, silent for a few seconds. 1,000 memories flickered through my mind, the cold laughter, the humiliating words, and the image of a woman kneeling on a marble floor. I set my pen down and said calmly, "Send her in." The door opened a few minutes later. Charlotte stepped in, no longer the powerful woman with the sharp, polished edges of the financial world. Her hair was messy, the once golden strands fading to gray. The smooth glow of her skin had turned pale, and her eyes, the same eyes that once made entire staffs bow, were now dulled by exhaustion and remorse. She still carried a handbag, but it was no longer the glittering kind she used to flaunt. I stood, watching the woman before me, feeling neither anger nor pity. Just a distant stillness, the quiet recognition of a past that no longer had a claim on me. Charlotte stopped in the middle of the glass office and looked up at me. The morning light poured in, catching the lines around her eyes. Her voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry." The words were so fragile they almost dissolved in the air. "I've lost, Victoria. Everything. My job, my reputation, my friends, they've all left me as if I never existed." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "What I don't understand is, how did you disappear and come back as this? An empire. A woman the entire financial system has to respect. How did you do it?" I looked at her for a long time before answering, my voice low but clear, each word steady enough to echo through the quiet room. "Because you built banks on fear. I built an empire on trust." Charlotte froze, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I continued, every syllable deliberate. "You used fear to control employees, to keep clients, to make people obey. But I chose to believe people could be better if given a chance. Trust doesn't need vaults or contracts. It protects itself through loyalty." She lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. Tears fell to the floor, each drop like a fragment of the years she had lost chasing status and validation. I never meant for things to turn out this way," she whispered, voice cracking. "Back then, I was just afraid that if I lost my position, I'd have nothing left. I became too much like father, always believing worth was measured in numbers, not people." I said nothing. In the silence, the faint hum of the air conditioner and the quiet tapping of keyboards from the outer office filled the space, like the slow, steady ticking of time itself. Charlotte took another step forward, then suddenly fell to her knees. I startled. She gripped my hand tightly, so hard that my fingers turned cold. "Please, forgive me," she cried. "You can destroy me if you want, but don't despise me. Don't turn me into the pitiful person I once made you feel like. I was wrong, Victoria, I was so wrong." Her voice broke apart, trembling between sobs and shallow breaths. I could feel her shaking not just from fear, but from the despair of someone who had finally lost what could never be bought back. I bent down slightly and placed my other hand gently on her shoulder. "Stand up, Charlotte," I said softly but firmly. "I don't need anyone to kneel, I just need them to respect." She kept crying, her head bowed, her body small and fragile beneath the light. I turned my gaze toward the window, my tone calm, almost wistful. "I don't hate you," I said. "I just feel sorry. Sorry that all the years you were called successful, you never truly understood what success meant. Success isn't making others feel small. Success is making them believe they can grow." Charlotte lifted her head, her eyes wet and searching, as if she were looking at a stranger. "You've changed," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I just found myself again. The day I left Dallas, I thought I was a failure. But that failure taught me everything your victories never could: how to stand on my own, how to respect others, and how to respect myself." The room fell quiet. Sunlight slanted through the glass, casting a faint golden hue over us both. Charlotte sat still, her tears drying slowly on her cheeks. I turned back to the desk, poured her a glass of water, and held it out. "Drink," I said gently. "You need to calm yourself." She took the glass, her hands trembling. "What are you going to do with me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with fear. I smiled faintly and shook my head. "Nothing. You've already done that yourself. Green Fund doesn't exist to take revenge on anyone. We rebuild what others destroyed. Trust." She said nothing. Outside, the faint sounds of cars and the soft wind passing through the city carried a familiar rhythm, the quiet persistence of people moving forward, regardless of who had fallen. Charlotte set the glass down and looked around the office at the clear walls, the green plants, the words engraved in silver on the far wall. "Finance built on fairness." The slogan broke her. Tears streamed down again as she whispered through her sobs. "Back then, I had everything and I understood none of this. And you. You were the one they said had nothing, yet you built a world without needing anyone's permission to exist." I walked closer and spoke softly. "No one is born knowing how to love the right way. But some choose to learn, and others choose to avoid it. You can start over, Charlotte. You don't need Green Fund, and you don't need your old reputation. You just need to relearn how to live with kindness." Charlotte went still for a moment, then nodded faintly. I opened the desk drawer and took out a small envelope. "This is the address of a community finance organization in Houston. They're looking for someone with management experience to help train women who've lost their jobs. I think you'd fit there." She took the envelope with both hands, holding it tightly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. "There's no need to thank me," I said gently. "Just don't repeat the same mistakes. Don't ever use power to make someone else feel small." She nodded, then stood up. And for the first time in years, I saw Charlotte bow her head, not out of submission, but out of genuine respect. When the door closed behind her, I stood alone in the room, gazing out at the city. The Austin sky was impossibly blue. In the glass reflection, I saw myself small, but steady. I thought back to that rainy day years ago, when I walked out of a bank clutching a cardboard box, my heart heavy with shame. The same light, the same city, but everything had changed. Because now, I no longer needed to prove my worth. I just needed to live it. After that meeting, Charlotte disappeared completely from the news, from social media, from the world she once lived for. The glossy photos, the polished conference panels, the speeches about female leadership in finance, all of it vanished, erased as if it had never existed. I later heard she was working as an office assistant at a small branch in San Antonio, her job mostly administrative, her pay modest but steady, her name no longer recognized. Some said she moved back in with our father, others claimed she rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the glittering events she once called her world. I never tried to find out which was true. Sometimes, silence is the only form of mercy we can offer the past. One late autumn afternoon, as the air in Austin began to cool, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. On the other end was a soft, raspy voice I hadn't heard so clearly in years. "Victoria, it's Mom." I froze. "Where are you?" I asked quietly. "At Meadowfield Retirement Home, just outside Houston." She replied gently. "If you're free, come see me. Don't worry, I'm not seriously ill, I just wanted to talk to you once." The next day, I drove. The 3-hour road stretched endlessly across quiet suburbs and open fields that smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth. By dusk, the facility appeared a small, neat building with red roof tiles and a front garden filled with lavender and wild daisies. As I stepped inside, a nurse greeted me with a warm smile. "Mrs. Bennett is out on the porch, as usual," she said softly. "She's been waiting for her daughter." Mom sat there in a wooden rocking chair, a knitted blanket draped across her legs. She was thinner than before, her hair almost entirely gray, but her eyes still carried the same light I remembered. When she saw me, she smiled softly, her trembling hand lifting in a gentle wave. "My daughter," she whispered. I walked over and sat beside her, taking her wrinkled hand in mine. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the slow rotation of an old ceiling fan above the porch. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said quietly. I smiled faintly and shook my head. "I owed you an afternoon like this." It was a long while before she spoke again. "After you left, the house became loud. Your father couldn't stand the silence. He'd say you were ungrateful, that you'd shamed the family. And your sister, she kept trying to prove him right, building her world around his approval. Together, they made a place where I no longer fit." Her voice wasn't bitter, just tired, a confession carved from years of quiet endurance. Then one day, I realized I was exhausted. I didn't want anyone to feel guilty, so I checked myself in here. It's peaceful. Fewer raised voices, fewer dinners where you have to pretend to smile. She turned her gaze toward the garden, her tone softening to a whisper. "I'm not lonely, Victoria. Loneliness isn't about being alone, it's living among people who don't really see you." I sat in silence, my chest tightening with a mix of warmth and ache. "Is Dad still living with Charlotte?" I asked softly. She nodded. "He sold the house, moved in with her. He speaks less now, spends hours just staring into space. I think, deep down, he knows he was wrong, but he doesn't have the courage to say it out loud." Then she turned to me, her eyes gentle yet searching, filled with something that felt like both pride and sorrow. "I know you're strong," she said. "But are you happy, Victoria?" That question left me silent. The wind on the porch stirred the curtains gently, and the last rays of sunlight fell through in pale golden streaks across the floor. I watched the light for a moment, then spoke softly, my voice catching but honest. "For the first time in my life. Maybe I am, Mom." She squeezed my hand and smiled. "That's enough," she whispered. "I don't need you to be rich or famous. I just need to know that you're at peace." I stayed with her until nightfall, listening as she told me stories about the women she shared the home with, women who had been abandoned by their children, yet somehow found joy again in caring for one another. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door, her dry, fragile hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Don't go back to Dallas," she said softly. "Keep living the life you chose." I hugged her tightly. "I promise," I whispered. A few weeks later, I did something I never thought I would. I bought back our old house in Dallas, the place that once held some of the most painful memories of my life. When I met the agent, he said the previous owner sold it cheap. Said he didn't want to keep the past anymore. I stood in the living room, where my father once lectured me that money defines worth, where Charlotte used to boast about her first car, and where I once sat on the floor, typing lines of code under a dim desk lamp. Now it was just an empty house. But instead of bitterness, I felt something else, an opportunity. A chance to turn an old wound into something good. I called Miles and shared my idea. "I want to turn this house into a community finance center," I said, "a place where women and older adults can learn how to manage money, plan their lives, and rebuild trust." Miles was quiet for a moment, then chuckled. "Green space," he said. "That sounds about right." I laughed softly. Yes, green space, a place to replant trust. 3 months later, the center opened. I kept the original frame of the house, just repainted it in soft white and gray, and expanded the backyard garden. In the old living room, I placed light wooden tables and shelves filled with guides on personal finance, lessons about rights, saving, and investment. Every week, women in their 40s and 50s, retirees, and even young girls came to learn how to take control of their finances, something society had long allowed men to dictate. I taught them how to open accounts, read contracts, and most importantly, how to believe they had the right to independence. On the main wall, I hung a wooden plaque engraved with the words, "You deserve respect, even when no one offers it. Beneath it was a small framed photo of my mother and me, taken on that quiet afternoon at Meadowfield. Sometimes, I would visit her again. Each time, she asked about Greenspace, about the women who came to learn, and smiled as I told her their stories. "You're doing exactly what the world needs," she said softly. "You're giving back what was once taken from you." One evening, after leaving the nursing home, I drove across Congress Bridge and watched the Austin lights shimmer on the surface of the water. I thought of Charlotte, of my father, of everyone who had ever made me feel invisible. But now, there was no anger left, only a quiet understanding. Some wounds don't need revenge, they just need to be turned into light that guides someone else's way. I stopped the car in front of Greenspace. The soft yellow lights in the garden reflected off the wooden sign by the door. I ran my fingers gently over the carved words, feeling the night breeze brush through my hair. For the first time in my life, I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone. I just needed to live calmly, freely, and as nothing but myself.